The chandelier lights in the Grand Empire Ballroom glimmered like 1,000 eyes watching from above. Beneath their cold sparkle, guests in silk gowns and black tuxedos whispered over glasses of champagne. Tonight was supposed to be a night of celebration. Adrian Moore's rise as one of the city's most promising entrepreneurs. Yet the moment that would be remembered forever was not his speech, not his deal, but the sound of his hand striking his wife's face. The crack echoed like a gunshot. Elena staggered back, her cheek blazing red, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had come quietly, hoping only to stand by her husband's side, to remind him she still existed after weeks of being ignored. She carried no jewelry, no fancy dress, just a simple navy gown that clung to her growing frame. She was 6 months pregnant, but to Adrian, she was nothing more than a burden. Beside him stood Vanessa, the mistress who had slithered her way into his life. Her lips curled in triumph as Adrian, without shame, shoved Elena again. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed, phones were raised, yet no one dared step forward. The humiliation was complete. Elena, the woman who had sacrificed everything, was reduced to a spectacle, her dignity stripped in front of strangers. Her hands instinctively clutched her belly, as if shielding her unborn child from the violence. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. The silence that followed was suffocating. Adrian's voice cut through it like a blade. "You don't belong here. Leave before I forget myself again." The cruelty in his tone made the guests shift uncomfortably. Some turned away, too cowardly to interfere. Others leaned closer, hungry for the scandal unfolding. Vanessa rested her manicured hand on Adrian's arm, whispering something smug. He smirked, proud of his public display, as if parading his mistress and striking his wife proved his power. Elena stood frozen. The man she once trusted with her life had just shattered it before an audience. Her chest tightened, not just from the sting of his hand, but from the realization that love had turned into poison. Still, somewhere beneath the shame, a flame of defiance flickered. She would not collapse here. She would not give him the satisfaction of watching her crawl. Taking a shaky breath, Elena lifted her chin. The room spun, but her resolve steadied. If this was the night Adrian wanted to destroy her, he had succeeded. Yet he had also created something he could never control. A silence lingered, heavy, before she turned away, walking slowly toward the exit, each step carving the memory into every witness's mind. What no one knew, not Adrian, not Vanessa, not the gossiping guests, was that this humiliated, discarded wife carried a secret more powerful than all of them combined. And soon, the man who slapped her would learn regret the hard way. Before the slap that shook the ballroom, Elena Moore's life had already been unraveling, thread by thread. Once she believed in fairy tales. At 27, she married Adrian, the man who promised her forever with words dipped in honey. He whispered that she was his light, his reason to fight through long nights at the office. Back then, Elena believed him. She was the kind of woman who carried love like an anchor, steady, unshakable, even when storms came. They had started in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Manhattan. Elena worked as a receptionist at a small law firm, saving every cent, while Adrian climbed the corporate ladder. She cooked, cleaned, encouraged him when rejections came, and sewed loose buttons on his shirts at midnight. She thought sacrifice was love. She thought patience was strength. But slowly, the man who once held her hand tightly on subway rides became a stranger who barely noticed her at the dinner table. Adrian's ambition was a fire that burned everything in its path, including her. He began to complain about her small job, mocking her for not contributing enough. When Elena suggested going back to school, he laughed. You can't even handle a real career. Just stay home, have children, and let me handle the important things." The words stung, but Elena bit her tongue. She told herself he was just stressed. Pregnancy had been her secret joy, a spark of hope that maybe a baby would soften Adrian's sharp edges. She dreamed of late nights rocking their child, of Adrian finally looking at her with tenderness again. Instead, he grew colder. The news of her pregnancy brought not pride but irritation. "How are we supposed to afford this now? You're already useless, and now you'll be even more of a burden." The first slap came weeks later, a small argument over dinner. She had cooked pasta when he wanted steak. The sting across her cheek left her in shock, but Adrian's apology, roses and tears, tricked her into forgiveness. She convinced herself it was an accident, that love was stronger than one moment of anger. But once a line is crossed, it is crossed forever. The slaps multiplied, the insults sharpened, and the apologies grew fewer. Behind closed doors, Elena cried into her pillow so no one would hear. She carried her unborn child with trembling hands, whispering promises that she would protect it, even if no one protected her. Friends noticed her pale face, the long sleeves in summer, the way she avoided eye contact, but she brushed it off. "I'm just tired," she said, always tired. What hurt the most was not the bruises but the loneliness. She had given up dreams, family connections, and even her own pride for a man who treated her like nothing. Each night, she stared at the ceiling, asking herself when love had turned into chains. And yet, even in her weakest moments, a quiet strength was forming. Silent, but waiting. And the night of the gala, when Adrian chose humiliation over compassion, that strength finally woke up. The night Adrian threw Elena out was colder than any winter she had ever known. The rain hammered against the windows of their penthouse, drumming louder than her heart. She had begged him for a shred of kindness, a moment of mercy. "Adrian, please, I'm carrying your child. Can we at least talk?" Her voice trembled, but her eyes tried to hold on to some dignity. Adrian didn't hear her. He didn't want to. He stood with Vanessa draped at his side, a glass of champagne in his hand. Vanessa smirked, whispering in his ear like poison wrapped in silk. "She's pathetic. You deserve better." And Adrian, the man who once promised Elena the world, nodded in agreement. With a sudden fury, he grabbed Elena's arm and shoved her toward the door. The blow knocked her against the wall, her knees buckling under the weight of her pregnancy. She clutched her stomach instinctively, protecting the life within her as pain surged through her body. "Get out," Adrian growled. "You're nothing but dead weight. Vanessa is my future. Your history." The words cut deeper than any slap. Elena's lips parted, but no sound came. She had no strength left to argue. She looked into his eyes one last time, searching for the man she had loved, the man she had once believed in. It was gone. All she saw was cruelty. The rain swallowed her whole as the door slammed shut behind her. She staggered down the steps, suitcase in hand, her thin coat soaked within seconds. The streets blurred beneath the downpour, headlights flashing like judgmental eyes. Her tears mixed with the rain, indistinguishable, invisible. Passers-by glanced, but did not stop. To them, she was just another broken woman on a stormy night. She walked for hours, aimless, numb. The cold bit at her skin, and the weight of the child inside her pressed harder against her ribs. Her body screamed for rest, but there was nowhere to go. Adrian had frozen her accounts, cut off her cards. She had nothing. No money, no shelter, no one to call. She had traded all her connections for his love. And now she was left with nothing but a broken heart and a fragile life inside her womb. Her legs finally gave out near an alleyway. She collapsed onto the wet pavement, her suitcase falling open, clothes spilling into the gutter. The sight of her belongings, once carefully folded, now drenched in filthy water, broke something inside her. For the first time, Elena let herself sob without restraint. The rain couldn't hide it anymore. She was alone. Lightning split the sky, illuminating her pale face, her swollen belly, her eyes filled with despair. She pressed her hands against the concrete, whispering, "I'll protect you. No matter what, I won't let him destroy us." Her words trembled into the storm, a vow carved from pain. And just as her strength threatened to fade, a shadow appeared, a figure holding an umbrella, watching her with quiet intensity. The storm raged, but beneath the downpour stood a tall figure with an umbrella tilted just enough to shield her from the worst of the rain. Elena blinked through the blur of water and tears, her body trembling against the cold pavement. The stranger crouched down, his polished shoes soaking in the puddles, his sharp eyes softening as they fell on her. "Elena Moore?" His voice was deep, steady, almost startling in its familiarity. She searched his face, and recognition flickered. Richard Blackwell. Years ago, he had been nothing more than a name whispered in financial circles, heir to a powerful dynasty, now CEO of a rival firm. But to Elena, he was a ghost from her past, a friend of her late mother who had vanished when she chose to live outside her family's world of wealth. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her lips pale and quivering. "More importantly," he countered gently, sliding the umbrella to shield her completely, What are you doing out here? His eyes darted to her belly, the soaked suitcase, the shivering frame that screamed of betrayal. Get up. You'll catch your death. Elena wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need saving, but the words stuck in her throat. Her body betrayed her, leaning into his arm as he helped her to her feet. His coat, warm and heavy, settled across her shoulders, carrying the faint scent of cedar and rain. For the first time in hours, she felt covered. Richard guided her toward a waiting black car parked discreetly at the curb. The driver opened the door without question, his eyes avoiding Elena's swollen face. Inside, the leather interior glowed with soft light, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Elena sank into the seat, her hands still trembling as she clutched her belly. She expected questions, pity, judgment, but Richard offered none. Instead, he sat across from her, his expression unreadable, though his jaw tightened every time he looked at the fading bruise on her cheek. Finally, he spoke. "He did this to you?" The question hung heavy in the air. Elena lowered her eyes, shame burning her throat. "It doesn't matter." "It matters," Richard said firmly, "because a man who raises his hand to a woman has already lost everything worth keeping." Her chest tightened at his words. No one had defended her in so long. Not friends, not neighbors, not even herself. And now here was Richard, a man of power, speaking with a conviction she had forgotten existed. The car pulled into the driveway of a secluded townhouse, far from the glittering towers of the city. Richard helped her inside, guiding her to a warm fire already lit in the hearth. As she sat, the heat thawing her frozen skin, he knelt beside her once more. "You don't have to explain tonight," he said softly. "But remember this, Adrian thinks he's broken you. He has no idea who you really are." Elena froze, her eyes locking on his. He knew. Somehow, Richard knew the secret she had buried deep, and in that moment she realized she was no longer as powerless as Adrian believed. While Elena rested in the quiet warmth of Richard's townhouse, another scene was unfolding across the city. Adrian Moore stood tall in a glittering private club, Vanessa at his side like a trophy polished for display. Laughter rippled through the room, the clinking of crystal glasses blending with jazz notes floating from the grand piano. To the world, Adrian was the man who had it all. A rising star, a beautiful mistress, a future dripping with promise. He raised his glass high. To new beginnings. His voice boomed with the arrogance of a man convinced he had won. Vanessa leaned into him, her hand trailing along his arm, her smile wicked with triumph. The guests around them, investors, colleagues, and opportunists, cheered, eager to bask in his glow. Not one dared question the wife who had mysteriously vanished, not one whispered about the slap heard at the gala. In Adrian's world, silence could be bought. Yet beneath the surface, cracks began to form. As he toasted his success, his phone buzzed with news articles. Young entrepreneur Adrian Moore dazzles at gala with new partner. The headlines read, splashed with photographs of him and Vanessa. At first, he grinned, proud of the attention. But then the comments started. Online whispers questioning the sudden absence of Elena, sharp-eyed critics noticing the redness on her face in the background of a single blurred photo. Adrian ignored it, convincing himself the noise would fade. He had Vanessa now, and together they would conquer the social ladder. "She'll beg to come back," he told Vanessa smugly. "Women like her can't survive on their own." Vanessa's laugh was low and poisonous, but even she wondered if his certainty was misplaced. Back at the townhouse, Elena sat before the fire, her body wrapped in Richard's blanket, her mind unraveling the web of betrayal. She thought of the night Adrian first called her useless, the sting of his words almost sharper than his hand. She thought of the child inside her, the innocent life tied to a man unworthy of being called a father. For years, she had told herself she was powerless because she chose love over wealth, humility over inheritance. But Richard's words echoed, "He has no idea who you really are." Her heart pounded. She had buried her birthright, locked it away to live an ordinary life. But ordinary had brought her nothing but scars. The world believed she was a discarded wife, penniless and forgotten. Only she knew the truth, that she was heir to a fortune Adrian could not even dream of. For the first time, Elena's tears dried before they could fall. Her reflection in the firelight did not look like a victim. It looked like a woman standing on the edge of rebirth. And while Adrian celebrated with his mistress, he never imagined that the wife he threw away was preparing to return as someone far more powerful than he could ever control. The following days blurred together for Alina. Though she now had a roof over her head, the weight of everything pressed down heavier than the storm that had drenched her body. Each morning, she woke with a hand instinctively pressed against her stomach, whispering to the child within, promising safety while barely believing it herself. At night, nightmares clawed at her sleep. She saw Adrian's face twisted with contempt, his hand raised, his voice spitting venom. She saw Vanessa's smirk, cruel and satisfied, and she saw herself, alone, soaked in rain, collapsing with no one to catch her. She often startled awake, drenched in sweat, the echo of Adrian's words burning in her ears. "You're nothing but dead weight." Richard checked on her daily, but Alina rarely spoke. She thanked him quietly for meals, for warmth, for silence. Yet inside, shame ate at her. She hated that he had seen her broken, that he had witnessed her collapse. She hated herself for staying with Adrian so long, for believing in his lies, for letting her strength slip away. One evening, she sat by the window, staring at the city lights in the distance. They glimmered like mocking stars, reminding her of the world she once chose to leave behind. Her mother's voice rose from memory, soft but steady. "You are stronger than you think, Alina. Don't let anyone decide your worth." The words twisted into a knife. She had let Adrian decide everything, what she wore, where she went, how she lived. And now she sat in another man's house, waiting for direction like a child. Her chest tightened, tears threatening again, but this time they came with anger. She slammed her hand against the window frame. "Why did I let him do this to me?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why did I give him everything?" The fury frightened her, but it also lit a spark. For so long, she had swallowed pain in silence, believing patience would save her. But silence had only fed Adrian's cruelty. That night, as she lay awake, she realized despair was a luxury she could not afford. She was carrying a life. She could not allow her child to inherit fear. She could not allow Adrian's shadow to stretch into their future. If she stayed broken, then Adrian would win twice, once for humiliating her, and again for keeping her from rising. The next morning, she rose early, her hair unkempt, her eyes swollen, but there was something new in her step. She walked into the small study of the townhouse where Richard was reading. For the first time, she looked him directly in the eye. "I can't live like this anymore," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "I need to stand again. But to do that, I'll need help." Richard studied her, his expression unreadable, then nodded once. "Then it's time the world remembers who you really are." And with those words, Alina's despair cracked open, revealing the first glimmer of the woman Adrian would soon regret underestimating. The study was filled with the faint crackle of a fire, shadows flickering against the walls, lined with books and old portraits. Alina stood rigid, her hands clasped protectively over her belly, her breath shallow as Richard's words echoed in the silence. "It's time the world remembers who you really are." Her heart pounded. For years she had buried that truth so deeply, she almost believed it wasn't real. She had wanted nothing more than an ordinary life, free from the suffocating expectations of her family name. She had chosen anonymity over luxury, love over legacy. And Adrian had taken that trust and shattered it into pieces. Richard leaned forward, his eyes sharp but steady. "Your mother wanted you to have a choice. She wanted you to experience life outside the glare of wealth. But Elena, hiding doesn't mean you're powerless. You are the rightful heir to the Moore estate and the Mackenzie investments your grandfather built. Do you have any idea what that means?" Elena shook her head slowly. "It means nothing if I couldn't even protect myself." "It means," Richard cut in, his voice low but firm, "you're one of the most powerful women in this city, if you choose to claim it. Adrian thinks you're finished. Vanessa believes she's won. But they're playing with crumbs, Alina. You hold the entire table." The words struck her like thunder. She lowered herself into the chair, her fingers trembling against the armrest. Memories surged, her mother's gentle insistence that she live quietly, the sealed letters from her family's lawyers she never opened, the trust fund documents she tucked away like they were poison. She had walked away from all of it for love, and now love had turned into chains. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. If I claim it, if I step back into that world, there's no going back. Richard's gaze softened, though his voice remained steady. Maybe that's exactly what you need. Going back isn't an option anymore, Elena. You've already crossed the line the moment Adrian raised his hand against you. Now you choose. Stay broken or rise as who you were always meant to be. Silence filled the room, heavy but electric. Elena's mind spun with fear, doubt, and a spark of something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Could she truly become that woman? Could she take the name, the fortune, the power, and wield it not just for herself but for her child? She pressed her hand firmly against her belly, grounding herself in the tiny heartbeat inside. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about revenge or pride. It was about building a world where her child would never have to kneel to cruelty, where Adrian's shadow could never reach them again. Her lips parted, and though her voice was barely above a whisper, it carried the weight of a vow. Then I'll claim it. Richard's eyes glimmered with something like pride. Good, because once you do, Adrian Moore will never see it coming. And in that quiet study, Elena Moore began her transformation from broken wife to hidden heiress, ready to rewrite her destiny. The next morning, Elena rose before the sun. For weeks, she had woken heavy with despair, her body weighed down by exhaustion and grief. But today, something different stirred inside her. She moved with purpose, each step firm as if testing the ground beneath her for the first time. She was no longer just surviving, she was preparing. Richard had arranged a private suite in the heart of Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling mirrors stretched across one wall, reflecting a woman Elena hardly recognized. Her hair hung limp, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with shadows of sleepless nights. She touched the glass, tracing the outline of her reflection, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This is not who I am," she whispered. The door opened, and a team of professionals entered. Stylists, advisors, legal consultants, summoned discreetly by Richard. They greeted her with respectful nods, aware of her true identity, though none dared speak it aloud. At first, Elena resisted. "I don't need all this, I just need to stand on my own." One of the women, a stylist with kind eyes, stepped forward. "Sometimes standing tall means allowing yourself to look like the world cannot break you." The words sank deep. Elena nodded slowly, surrendering to the process. Hours passed. Her hair, once dull, now framed her face in soft waves that glimmered under the light. Makeup brushed away the tiredness, revealing the sharp cheekbones and determined eyes that had always been there, waiting. A tailored gown replaced her threadbare clothes, its fabric flowing like liquid steel, a symbol of elegance and strength combined. When she finally stood again before the mirror, Elena gasped softly. Gone was the broken woman who had stumbled into the storm. Staring back at her was someone new, or perhaps someone rediscovered, her mother's daughter, the heiress she was born to be. But the transformation wasn't just on the surface. Richard placed a folder on the table, filled with documents, stock reports, and sealed accounts. "This is your arsenal," he said. "Every signature here puts you back in control. You can reclaim the wealth Adrian doesn't even know exists. But more than that, you can control the narrative. He humiliated you in public. Now you decide how the world will see you next." Elena's hands trembled as she reached for the pen. The weight of the decision pressed against her chest, but she signed each page with deliberate strokes. Every signature felt like shedding a chain, breaking free from the prison of silence. When the final document was sealed, Richard met her gaze. "The world is going to see you again, Elena, not as his victim. As yourself." She exhaled, a long breath that seemed to release years of pain. For the first time since the slap, her shoulders straightened, her eyes steady with fire. And in that suite, Elena Moore was reborn, not as the discarded wife Adrian mocked, but as the heiress who would return to make him kneel. The night of the charity gala arrived, the very same event where Adrian once paraded Vanessa as his prize while discarding his wife like yesterday's news. This time, the air inside the Grand Empire ballroom carried a different tension, one that would soon ignite into scandal. Guests in glittering gowns and crisp tuxedos filled the marble hall, sipping champagne, gossiping about mergers and fortunes. Adrian stood at the center, his arm looped possessively around Vanessa's waist. She shimmered in a golden dress, laughing too loudly at his jokes, flaunting her victory to every watching eye. Adrian's smirk said it all. He believed he had conquered his past. Then the doors opened. Every head turned. A hush fell over the ballroom, so sharp it silenced even the orchestra mid-note. Elena Moore entered, her presence commanding without a word. She wore a sleek black gown, its lines sharp as a blade, diamonds glinting at her neck. Her hair, once limp and lifeless, cascaded in polished waves, framing eyes that burned with quiet fire. No longer the trembling woman in a navy dress, this was a vision of power, a woman who had walked through humiliation and returned untouchable. Gasps rippled through the crowd, whispers hissed like sparks. Is that her, the wife? She looks different. Photographers scrambled, cameras flashing, desperate to capture the transformation. Adrian froze. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. His wife, the woman he slapped, discarded, mocked, stood radiant before him, and she was not broken. She was magnificent. Vanessa's smile faltered, her painted confidence cracking as she gripped Adrian's arm tighter. Ignore her, she hissed under her breath. She's nothing. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. Elena did not rush. She glided forward, every step deliberate, every gaze following her as though she owned the very ground beneath their feet. When she reached the center of the hall, she stopped, lifting a glass of champagne from a passing tray with perfect poise. Her eyes found Adrian's. She held his stare, unwavering, the corners of her lips curving into the faintest smile. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was a promise. The silence stretched until someone broke it with a single clap, then another. Soon the ballroom erupted into applause. Not for Adrian, not for Vanessa, but for Elena. The crowd, once complicit in her humiliation, now celebrated her return. Adrian's jaw tightened, rage and panic warring behind his eyes. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, realizing her throne was crumbling beneath her stilettos. Elena raised her glass slightly, her voice carrying across the room, calm and lethal. It's good to be back. And in that single moment, Adrian Moore understood. His nightmare had just begun. Adrian Moore had always believed he controlled every room he entered, but as Elena stood before him at the gala, radiant and untouchable, he felt the ground slip from under his feet. He forced a smile, desperate to maintain composure, but the beads of sweat forming at his temples betrayed the storm brewing inside. He tugged Vanessa closer, pressing a kiss against her cheek for the cameras, pretending he was unfazed. She's just trying to make a scene, he muttered, though his voice quivered. Vanessa smiled thinly, but her nails dug into his arm. She could feel the shift in the air too. The way investors, partners, and friends who once bowed to Adrian now gravitated toward Elena, their curious eyes brimming with new calculations. Elena didn't approach him. She didn't need to. Instead, she mingled with ease, speaking to key figures with a grace Adrian had never granted her. Each conversation was deliberate, each handshake purposeful. And when Richard Blackwell appeared at her side, tall and commanding, the whispers swelled into an uproar. Blackwell is with her? Someone gasped. Does that mean she's back? The rumors raced like wildfire. By the time Adrian realized what was happening, half the ballroom was no longer watching him. They were watching Elena. He clenched his jaw, forcing his way through the crowd until he stood before her. The music softened, conversations faltered. Elena, he said through gritted teeth, masking his fury with a brittle smile. You look, well? She met his gaze, her expression serene, almost amused. Better than the last time you saw me, wouldn't you agree? The words hit like a slap. Murmurs erupted. Vanessa's face burned crimson, her grip on Adrian slipping. Elena, he hissed, lowering his voice. What are you doing? Why are you here? Her eyes sparkled with quiet defiance. Why? Because this is my world too. You thought you destroyed me, Adrian, but you only freed me. Before he could respond, Richard placed a hand on Elena's back, his tone calm but edged with steel. Perhaps you should save this conversation for another time, Moore. Tonight is about charity, not tantrums. Adrian's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced another hollow laugh. Of course. Enjoy your night. He retreated, his pride shredded by the eyes that followed him, no longer with admiration but with suspicion. In the corner, Vanessa seethed, her smile plastered on though her voice trembled. She's nothing but a showpiece, Adrian. Don't let her get to you. But for the first time, Adrian wasn't sure. He had built his empire on dominance, on bending others to his will. Now, for the first time, he felt like the prey. Across the room, Elena raised her glass once more, her eyes never leaving him. The message was clear. This was no longer his stage. And as the night ended, Adrian realized the woman he had cast aside was not gone. She was rising, and she would not stop until he fell. The gala ended with applause for Elena and whispers that haunted Adrian long into the night. He returned home with Vanessa clinging to his arm, her perfume thick enough to mask the stench of his panic. But once the doors of his penthouse shut, the mask slipped. Adrian stormed into his study, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, his hand trembling as he replayed the night in his mind. Elena, his Elena, standing taller than ever, glowing with a confidence that made him look small. And Richard Blackwell, that vulture, standing beside her like a guardian. The image clawed at him, fueling a rage he couldn't quench. "Stop pacing," Vanessa snapped, tossing her clutch on the sofa. "You're acting paranoid. She's just trying to scare you." Adrian spun on her, his eyes bloodshot. "Don't you get it? She's not just playing dress-up Vanessa, she knows something. The way she looked at me, she has power now." Vanessa rolled her eyes, but deep down, unease flickered across her face. "So what if she does? You still control your company. Your investors trust you. Don't let one washed-up wife get in your head." But the cracks were already forming. The next morning, Adrian arrived at his office to find a group of board members waiting. Their smiles were tight, their eyes cold. "More," one of them said. "We need to talk." They handed him a file filled with reports, subtle but undeniable patterns of mismanagement, funds unaccounted for, decisions that had bled the company of millions. Adrian's stomach twisted. "This is nonsense," he snapped. "Fabrications." Yet as he flipped through the pages, his confidence faltered. Someone had dug deep, pulling out the skeletons he thought were buried. And worse, there was Elena's name on one of the documents. She had quietly purchased shares through a shell company. Small at first, barely noticeable. But together, they added up to a stake significant enough to raise questions. "How long has she been buying in?" Adrian barked, his voice cracking. The board member shrugged. "Long enough. Investors are nervous. Blackwell's backing her, isn't he? If she decides to push, you could lose control." The words echoed like a death sentence. Adrian's empire, the one he had built on charm and intimidation, was slipping from his hands. And the woman he thought he'd destroyed was tightening her grip around his throat without even lifting a finger. By the time he stormed out of the boardroom, the world felt smaller. His phone buzzed with unanswered calls, investors demanding clarity, rumors swirling like vultures circling a corpse. Back at the penthouse, Vanessa sipped champagne, oblivious. "You worry too much," she purred. But Adrian barely heard her. His mind was consumed with one thought. Elena was no longer his victim. She was his greatest threat. And as night fell, Adrian realized the empire he had once ruled might soon belong to the very woman he tried to erase. The more Adrian tried to tighten his grip, the faster everything slipped away. Meetings that once ended with applause now ended with cold stares. Calls from investors went unanswered. Rumors of Elena's growing influence spread across Wall Street like wildfire. For the first time, Adrian felt powerless. At home, he sought comfort from Vanessa, but she was no longer the adoring mistress who clung to his every word. She noticed the shift in him, the cracks in his armor. She saw the way he tossed and turned at night, muttering Elena's name in fury. And it unsettled her. One evening, as Adrian paced the living room, ranting about board members and hostile takeovers, Vanessa leaned back on the velvet sofa, sipping her wine. Her tone was deceptively calm. "Maybe you're fighting the wrong battle, Adrian. Maybe it's time to let her win." Adrian froze, his eyes snapping toward her. "What did you just say?" Vanessa shrugged, twirling the stem of her glass. "Look around you. She's not the weak wife anymore. She's stronger, wealthier, and she has Richard Blackwell standing behind her. Do you really think you can beat that? Maybe it's smarter to step aside before you lose everything." His face darkened, rage boiling in his veins. "You think I'll bow to her? After everything I've done to build this empire? Never." Vanessa tilted her head, her lips curling into a sly smile. "Empires fall, Adrian. And when they do, smart people know when to abandon ship. I don't plan to sink with you." Her words cut deeper than any betrayal. For a moment, Adrian saw not the woman who had whispered promises in his ear, but the truth. Vanessa had never loved him. She loved the lifestyle, the wealth, the status. And now that those things were at risk, so was her loyalty. "You're ungrateful," he spat. "I gave you everything." "You gave me scraps," she countered coldly. "Elena was the wife, I was the entertainment. Don't confuse the two." The silence that followed was suffocating. Adrian's hands clenched into fists, but Vanessa only laughed softly, rising from the sofa. She slipped on her coat, her perfume lingering in the air like mockery. "Don't wait up," she said, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "I have better places to be tonight." The door slammed, and Adrian was left standing alone, his reflection in the window staring back at him, broken, desperate, and cornered. Meanwhile, across town, Vanessa entered a sleek rooftop bar where a familiar figure waited, Richard Blackwell. She leaned in close, her voice honeyed with false sweetness. "If Elena is really coming for him, then maybe I should be on her side." And with that single choice, Vanessa revealed her true nature. Not a partner, not a lover, but a viper ready to sink her fangs into whoever offered the most power. The ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel glittered under chandeliers, but the real heat wasn't from the lights. It was from the tension brewing among the city's wealthiest investors. Tonight's gathering was supposed to be Adrian Moore's victory lap, a chance to secure the funding for his next expansion. Instead, it became the stage for his first real humiliation. Adrian arrived in his tailored suit, Vanessa absent for the first time. He scanned the crowd, plastering on a confident smile, though his nerves gnawed at him. Whispers buzzed like bees in his ears. Elena Moore, Richard Blackwell, rising influence. He brushed them off, heading straight for the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice projecting bravado, "Moore Enterprises is on the brink of its greatest chapter yet. With your trust and investment, we will." The doors opened. Elena entered, draped in a midnight blue gown that shimmered like liquid sapphire. Richard walked beside her, commanding attention, but it was Elena who owned the room. Every head turned. Conversation ceased, cameras flashed. Adrian faltered mid-sentence, his throat dry. He hadn't expected her here, not tonight. Certainly not looking like this, poised, powerful, untouchable. She didn't rush. She moved slowly through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging warm smiles, as though she had been the host all along. By the time she reached the front, the investors were no longer watching Adrian. Their eyes were locked on her. Elena took a seat at the head table, Richard at her side. Then she placed a folder on the table, sliding it casually toward the investors nearest her. "Before you commit to any decisions tonight," she said, her voice calm but carrying through the hall, "perhaps you'd like to see another option." The investors opened the folder. Inside were documents, proof of Elena's controlling stake in several key ventures, details of her new initiative backed by Blackwell Holdings, and financial projections that dwarfed Adrian's promises. Gasps rippled through the room as the numbers spoke for themselves. Adrian's face drained of color. "This is sabotage," he barked, slamming his hand against the podium. "She's lying. She has nothing." But the investors were no longer listening. They leaned toward Elena, questions tumbling out, interest sparking in their eyes. One by one, they began shifting their attention, their loyalty, their faith. Elena didn't gloat. She simply met Adrian's glare with a calm, steady gaze. "I told you, Adrian, you thought I was gone, but I was only preparing." The crowd erupted in whispers, phones buzzing, deals already shifting hands. By the time the evening ended, Adrian's carefully curated image lay in ruins, overshadowed by the wife he once slapped into silence. As she rose to leave, Elena glanced back once more, her eyes cold but resolute. And in that moment, Adrian understood. This was only her first strike, and the war had just begun. Adrian Moore was no stranger to setbacks, but this was different. His empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing in plain sight. After Elena's public strike at the St. Regis, investors he once commanded with ease were calling her name instead. Each day, his phone rang less, his meetings thinned, his authority slipped like sand through his fingers. Desperation made him reckless. He called an emergency press conference at his corporate headquarters, determined to reclaim control. Cameras lined the room, reporters buzzing with questions about Elena's rising influence and Richard Blackwell's rumored backing. Adrian stepped onto the stage, jaw set, smile forced. "Let me make this clear," he began, gripping the podium as though it could anchor him. The rumors about my company, about my wife, ex-wife, are fabrications. Elena Moore is a fraud. She's manipulating investors with lies and false promises, and I will not let her tarnish the reputation I built with my own hands." His words dripped with venom, but his voice cracked under pressure. He didn't notice the shifting energy in the crowd until a reporter raised her hand, eyes gleaming. "Mr. Moore, if she's a fraud, how do you explain these?" She held up a thick file. Cameras clicked as the pages flashed across the screens. Inside were bank statements, contracts, and emails, evidence of Adrian's embezzlement, bribes, and secret accounts. Each document bore his signature, undeniable and damning. Adrian's blood ran cold. This is fabricated," he stammered, his face draining of color. "She planted these." The room erupted in chaos, reporters shouting over one another. "Are you denying these transactions? Did you siphon millions into offshore accounts? Is it true you used company funds to finance your mistress's lifestyle?" Vanessa's name appeared in the documents too. Lavish gifts, trips, even an apartment bought under a shell company. Adrian's carefully constructed image of the devoted businessman shattered in seconds. And then, as if orchestrated, the doors at the back of the room opened. Elena entered, calm, regal, unshaken. She carried no folder this time, no props. She didn't need them. She stood tall, her voice steady as she addressed the room. Those documents weren't planted. They were recovered from systems Adrian thought no one could access. Systems I had the right to as his wife. The evidence is real, and the truth is clear. The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian's chest heaved, his fists clenched, but the walls closed in around him. Every camera lens turned away from his fury and toward Elena's resolve. In that moment, Adrian realized he hadn't just lost control of the narrative. He had walked straight into her trap. And as the press swarmed Elena for answers, Adrian stood frozen, watching the empire he built unravel at the hands of the woman he had once dismissed as powerless. When the scandal broke, Vanessa Cruz's glittering life cracked overnight. The headlines were merciless. Adrian Moore exposed, Mistress named in corruption scandal. Her photographs, once the envy of socialites, now splashed across tabloids as symbols of greed and disgrace. She sat in her penthouse apartment, purchased with Adrian's stolen money, watching the news cycle devour them both. Her phone buzzed nonstop, not with invitations but with insults. Former friends unfollowed her, sponsors pulled out, doors slammed shut. She had built her status on Adrian's empire, and now that empire was crumbling, she was standing on ruins. That night, Adrian stormed into the apartment, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. "Pack your things," he snapped. "We're leaving the city. I'll fix this." Vanessa laughed bitterly, swirling her glass of wine. "Fix this? Adrian, you can't fix bankruptcy and prison sentences with a smile." His head snapped toward her, rage seething in his veins. "You ungrateful snake. After everything I gave you." "You gave me nothing," she cut in, her voice sharp as glass. "You used me to feed your ego, and now you want me to burn with you?" "No, Adrian, I'm not going down for your sins." Her words hit him harder than any slap. He lunged toward her, but she stood tall, unflinching. "Don't," she warned coldly. "You're finished, and you know it. The world isn't afraid of you anymore." The silence that followed was thick, dangerous. Vanessa set her glass down and reached for her phone. "I already have another meeting tonight, with Elena." Adrian froze. "You wouldn't dare." Her lips curled into a cold smile. "Oh, I would. You see, Adrian, power attracts loyalty, and you don't have any left." She walked past him, her heels clicking against the marble like gunshots. Adrian's fists clenched, but he didn't follow. For the first time he realized Vanessa wasn't his possession. She was abandoning him for survival. Hours later, Vanessa sat across from Elena in a quiet rooftop lounge, the city lights painting the night in gold. For once, Vanessa looked nervous. She twisted her ring, searching for words. "I know I was cruel to you. I mocked you. I stood beside him while he hurt you. But Elena, I don't want to sink with him. I can help you." Elena studied her, her face unreadable. "Help me? Or help yourself?" Vanessa's eyes flickered, shame mingling with desperation. "Both," she admitted. "But I know his secrets. I know the accounts he hasn't touched yet, the people still loyal to him. I can hand them to you. Just don't leave me with nothing." For a long moment, Elena said nothing. Then she leaned forward, her voice calm but cutting. "You chose his side when I was on the floor. Don't mistake me for him. I don't need you, but I'll use what you offer. Vanessa swallowed hard, realizing she had traded one master for another. And that night, Adrian Moore lost not only his empire, but also the mistress who once cheered his cruelty, because even she now stood in Elena's shadow. The courtroom was packed to the brim, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters lined the benches, cameras waiting just beyond the heavy oak doors. Everyone knew this was more than a legal battle. It was a reckoning. Adrian Moore, once hailed as a rising star in business, now stood accused of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. And the woman he had tried to erase was about to face him head-on. Adrian entered first, his once immaculate suit wrinkled, his hair graying at the edges from sleepless nights. He scanned the room, desperate for a friendly face, but found only cold stares. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Adrian's eyes fixed on the door as it opened. Elena stepped in. The room shifted as though gravity itself had tilted toward her. Dressed in a sharp ivory suit, she carried herself with the calm of someone who had nothing to fear. Richard Blackwell walked beside her, his presence reinforcing the strength she already radiated. She took her seat with quiet dignity, her eyes never once flinching toward Adrian. The judge called for order, and the proceedings began. Adrian's lawyer launched into a tirade, accusing Elena of manipulation, of orchestrating the downfall of a man who had only ever tried to provide for his family. But Elena remained silent, her expression cool, as though waiting for the storm to exhaust itself. When the time came, her lawyer rose, presenting stacks of evidence, bank statements, emails, hidden accounts, even testimonies from former employees who admitted to being silenced by Adrian's threats. Each piece landed like a hammer blow, chipping away at the fragile facade Adrian tried to maintain. And then, Elena herself took the stand. The courtroom hushed as she swore her oath, her voice steady. She looked directly at Adrian, no longer the trembling wife, but the heiress reclaiming her power. For years, I endured his cruelty in silence, she said, her voice clear. I believed patience and love could change him. But love is not supposed to leave bruises. Patience is not supposed to mean humiliation. Tonight, I stand not as his wife, not as his victim, but as a woman who refuses to be silenced again. Adrian leapt to his feet, his face twisted in rage. Lies. She's destroying me because I left her. She's nothing without me. The judge's gavel slammed down. Sit down, Mr. Moore. But the damage was done. His outburst revealed the very cruelty Elena had described. Gasps filled the courtroom, reporters scribbling furiously. By the time the judge adjourned for the day, it was clear where the case was heading. Adrian sat slumped, his power stripped, his empire collapsing, his name dragged through the mud. Elena rose gracefully, meeting his broken stare with one final truth. You thought I was nothing. Today, the world sees who you really are. The verdict wasn't even finalized when Adrian Moore's downfall became undeniable. The second day of the trial brought more witnesses, more damning documents, and more humiliation than he could withstand. The once celebrated entrepreneur now sat hunched at the defendant's table, his tie loosened, his hands trembling as though the walls of the courtroom were closing in on him. When the judge ordered a recess, Adrian stumbled out into the hallway, reporters swarming like vultures, microphones shoved into his face, cameras flashing mercilessly. Mr. Moore, do you deny the offshore accounts? What do you say about the abuse allegations? Did your mistress benefit from stolen funds? Each question was a dagger. He barked at them to back off, but his voice cracked, stripped of authority. The world was no longer listening to Adrian Moore. It was dissecting him. Inside the courtroom, Elena remained calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She knew the spectacle outside was punishment enough. She had no need to shout. The truth spoke louder than she ever could. By afternoon, the chaos reached its peak. Adrian tried to storm out of the courthouse, his lawyer trailing helplessly behind. But he didn't get far. 2 security officers intercepted him at the doors, their firm hands gripping his arms. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd as they turned him back toward the cameras. Mr. Moore, one officer said evenly, you're coming with us? Adrian's face drained of color. What? No, you can't. His voice rose, desperation spilling into hysteria. I'm Adrian Moore. Do you know who I am? But the world knew exactly who he was now. A fraud, an abuser, a man who destroyed his own empire with greed and cruelty. The cameras captured every second, Adrian thrashing, his words dissolving into pitiful pleas. "Please, listen. It's all lies. Elena set me up. His cries echoed against the courthouse walls, swallowed by the thunder of shutters snapping and reporters shouting. Elena stepped into the hallway just as he was dragged past. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Adrian saw no fear, no weakness, only resolve. She didn't speak, didn't flinch, but her silence was louder than his screams. The crowd surged, chanting her name, while Adrian's was spat out like poison. "Elena! Elena! Elena!" Vanessa, hidden in the back, watched in horror. She had thought she could play both sides, but now she realized there was no saving Adrian, no future in his shadow. She slipped away unnoticed, already plotting her next move. Outside, as Adrian was shoved into a waiting car, his last glance was not at the cameras, not at the officers, but at Elena standing tall on the courthouse steps. And in that moment, Adrian Moore finally understood. The wife he had slapped 100 times was the same woman who had brought him to his knees in front of the entire world. When the courthouse emptied, Elena found herself standing alone in a quiet corridor. The echo of chants, her name, her triumph, still clung to the air, but now there was silence. She pressed her back against the cool marble wall, her legs trembling from the weight of it all. For months, she had fought through fear, humiliation, and betrayal. And now, for the first time, Adrian was no longer looming over her. Her body shuddered as a sob slipped free. She pressed her hand against her mouth, but more followed, pouring out of her like a dam breaking. Not the tears of defeat she once cried into her pillow. These were tears of release, of survival, of finally breaking the chains that had bound her for too long. Richard appeared at the far end of the hall, his steps slow, careful, as though afraid to intrude. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space. "It's over, Elena," he said softly. "You don't have to carry it anymore." She looked up, her eyes brimming, her voice shaking. "I carried his hate for years. I thought it was love. I thought if I just endured, if I just stayed quiet, it would mean something. But all it did was destroy me." Richard's expression softened, but his tone was steady. "You weren't destroyed. You're still here. Stronger than him. Stronger than you even realize." Her gaze dropped to her hands, still trembling. She turned her palm upward, staring at the faint scars of years spent in silence. Then she pressed both hands against her belly, grounding herself in the heartbeat inside. For so long she had feared she wouldn't be enough for her child. But now she understood. Her strength wasn't in perfection. It was in survival. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they came with a smile, small and fragile. "I used to cry because I thought my life was over. Tonight, I'm crying because I finally have it back." Richard stepped closer, finally placing a steady hand on her shoulder. His presence wasn't demanding, wasn't heavy. It was simply there, a reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. "You've won, Elena," he said. "But this is only the beginning. Now it's time to build something new." She nodded, inhaling deeply, her chest rising with newfound steadiness. The woman who had been slapped into silence was gone. The heiress, the mother, the survivor, she remained. As they stepped out into the night, the city lights spread before her like 1,000 promises. The air was crisp, cleansing, carrying away the last remnants of fear. Elena tilted her head toward the sky, letting the tears dry against the cool breeze. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. She was ready for it. Weeks after the trial, the city buzzed with anticipation for the annual Grand Empire Charity Gala. But this year, the whispers weren't about Adrian Moore, whose name had become synonymous with scandal. They were about Elena, the woman who had risen from humiliation to power. When she arrived, the flash of cameras lit up the night like fireworks. She stepped from the sleek black car in a gown of deep crimson, the color of fire and rebirth. Richard walked beside her, dignified and silent, though the pride in his eyes was unmistakable. The crowd parted for her, not out of pity but respect. Inside, the ballroom glittered as always, chandeliers spilling golden light across marble floors. But the air was different. It carried expectation. All eyes followed Elena as she approached the podium. Conversations hushed. The orchestra softened to silence. She placed her hands on the microphone, her voice calm yet resonant. "For years, I believed silence was strength. I thought patience was love, but silence only fed cruelty and patience only deepened wounds. Tonight, I stand before you not as a victim, but as proof that survival is power." Gasps echoed softly, the crowd transfixed. Alina paused, her eyes sweeping across the faces, politicians, investors, celebrities, all waiting for her next words. "That is why," she continued, "I am establishing the Moore Foundation for Women and Children. A place of refuge, of justice, of hope, for those who have been silenced, as I once was. No woman should ever feel powerless. No child should ever live in fear." Applause erupted, thunderous and unrelenting. Tears glistened in the eyes of strangers, some rising to their feet. The announcement was more than charity. It was a declaration that Alina had turned her pain into purpose. Richard joined her on stage, offering quiet support as she held her head high. "This foundation will not only provide shelter," she added, "but also education, legal aid, and the means to rebuild lives. Because survival is not enough. We must thrive." The standing ovation shook the walls, the crowd chanting her name with admiration. "Alina, Alina, Alina." In the back of the room, Vanessa watched from the shadows. Once she had basked in the spotlight at Adrian's side. Now, she was nothing more than a footnote. Her envy burned, but even she couldn't deny the power of Alina's rise. Alina lifted her glass in a final toast, her voice carrying like a flame. "To every woman who has ever been told she is nothing, you are everything." The room roared in agreement. For the first time, Alina didn't feel like she was fighting for survival. She felt like she was leading a revolution. And in that moment, the discarded wife became something greater than an heiress. She became a beacon. Adrian Moore sat alone in a dim prison cell, the echo of dripping water his only companion. The suit he once wore like armor had been replaced with a faded uniform, and the empire he had built on arrogance and cruelty had crumbled into dust. His name, once spoken with admiration, was now cursed in headlines. His investors abandoned him, his mistress betrayed him, and his wealth evaporated into frozen accounts. Each night he replayed the same memory. The crack of his hand against Elena's face at the gala, the moment he thought he had proven his dominance. Instead, it became the first stone in his downfall. 100 slaps, 100 insults, 100 humiliations, all of it had returned to him tenfold. And now, he had nothing left but regret. Meanwhile, Alina's world bloomed with light. Weeks after launching the Moore Foundation, she stood on the balcony of her townhouse, the city stretching before her like an endless horizon. Richard joined her, setting 2 cups of tea on the railing. His presence was steady, no longer a rescuer, but a partner in her new journey. Her child kicked gently within her, reminding her of the life she had fought for. She placed her hand over her belly, smiling softly. "This," she whispered, "is what I survived for." Richard glanced at her, admiration in his eyes. "You didn't just survive, Alina. You changed everything. You turned pain into power. That's something no man can ever take away." For the first time in years, Alina felt peace. The scars Adrian left on her body and soul would never fully disappear, but they no longer defined her. She was more than his victim, more than his discarded wife. She was a mother, an heiress, and a leader who had turned her suffering into strength for others. One evening, as news broke of Adrian's sentencing, 15 years with no chance of early release, Alina watched silently from her living room. She didn't cheer, didn't gloat. She simply exhaled, letting the weight of the past fall away. Justice wasn't about revenge, it was about freedom. And she finally had hers. At the Foundation's grand opening weeks later, women and children filled the halls, their laughter echoing through the building. Alina walked among them, greeting each face with warmth. One young girl clung to her mother's hand, eyes wide with fear. Alina knelt down, meeting her gaze. "You're safe here," she promised, her voice steady. "No one can hurt you anymore." The child's tentative smile felt like sunlight. That night, Alina returned home, watching the city lights flicker like stars. She raised her glass to the sky, her voice steady and filled with quiet triumph. "To every woman who has been silenced, your voice will rise again, just like mine did." And with that, Alina Moore closed the chapter on pain, stepping fully into a life of dignity, freedom, and love. So the story has come to a close. And if you're still here with me right now, my dear friends, that means something in Alina's journey touched your heart in a way words alone cannot explain. Perhaps it was her strength, her tears, her fight for dignity, or maybe it was the reminder that no matter how broken we feel, there is always a chance to rise again. The Stoics used to say, "What stands in the way becomes the way." Marcus Aurelius believed that even our greatest obstacles can transform into the very path that leads us forward. Elena's pain became her power. Her humiliation became her rebirth. And that lesson is not just hers, it belongs to us too. We all face moments when life knocks us down, when betrayal, loss, or cruelty makes us question our worth. But like Epictetus reminded us, we cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them. Elena chose not to remain a victim. She chose healing, purpose, and a new life, not only for herself, but for others who once felt voiceless. So maybe tonight, as you reflect on this story, you can ask yourself, what pain in my life can I turn into strength? What silence can I turn into a voice? What scars can I turn into a foundation for something greater? Because if Elena's story proves anything, it's this: cruelty never wins, but courage always endures. Thank you for staying with me through every twist and every tear of this journey. If her story touched you, I invite you to like this video, share it with someone who might need the strength today, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of the resilience of the human heart. And remember, friends, your voice matters, your pain can heal, and your tomorrow can be brighter than your yesterday.